G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and today I want to look at, well, Legion Heavy Supports. I really tossed up how I was going to do this video. Was I going to bring up a bunch of charts and graphs and talk about points value versus firepower and what's best for your money? No. In the end, I thought that's too long-winded. It's going to be difficult enough trying to explain all of these vehicles at once in a getting started video, and trying to come up with what I suggest people should look at with the vehicles and the vehicle types, and what ones I should probably suggest avoiding. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're competitive or non-competitive, one of these suggestions I'm going to be making today aren't just going to focus on if I think they're viable in your list, but if I think they're viable and worth the money you're going to pay for them, because these things can be pretty expensive. So, with that in mind, do remember this. Play whatever you want to play. Just like when I talk about paint whatever you paint, however you want to paint it, you can pick any vehicle you like, even if it's not optimal, even if it is probably shooting yourself in the foot in the game, or shooting yourself in the foot for actual real world money spent. I'm going to be talking about how some of these kits build, because I built most of the tanks except for one, I think, of the types I'm going to talk about today. I've built every single one of these tanks, and we are talking about tanks. The reason I'm talking about tanks is tanks are one of the ones that you can take in a Rite of War, specifically the Armoured Breakthrough Rite of War. There is also an Iron Hands and I'm trying to think of the best way to put it for the Dark Angels. A not Iron Hands, not Armoured Breakthrough, but basically the same as those, but with their own slant list. Anyway, there are options for at least 3 different armoured lists, so it is good to look at them. It's something that every Legion has access to, and whilst there are more heavy support options like Leviathan Dreadnoughts, Deredaro Dreadnoughts, Fire Raptors, Kestis Assault Rams, we're just going to stick with the tanks. Okay, long preamble out the way, let's start with Predators. Predators are great because they're cheap, they've got moderately good armor. As long as the front faces the enemy, they're not going to get penetrated too much. Things like las cannons, yeah, they'll get through, but auto cannons and missile launchers, you're pretty safe around them. I wouldn't put money on it, but if you're sitting back on the battlefield, it's a worthy investment, and they're cheap in points. You can do a lot with them. Do remember though, the las cannon, twin las cannon option is not available in the Horus Heresy. There are other options that are available, such as a Flamestorm Cannon, a Magna Melter, a Heavy Conversion Beamer. Of course, you have a Plasma Cannon version, the Executioner version. Which of these is best is very subjective. Really, it's just one of those things where you got to play whichever one that fits your playstyle and your feel best. I will say in theory, the Conversion Beamer seems like a good option because you can shoot it from across the map. Basically, it's a super demolisher cannon. The thing is, it only works well at range. And it has firing calibration special rules, so you've got to sit still for a turn to fire it. That's not very helpful on a vehicle. It means that if you need to get into a better position, you're giving up firing at that turn, which is not ideal. Plus, if the enemy gets closer to you and it's not an open table, maybe you're playing city fights, something like that, it's not going to work very well. And it's only going to get weaker the closer you get to the enemy. So I probably wouldn't suggest the Conversion Beam in most games. The Plasma Executioner, that's a pretty good weapon option. The fact that you can fire lots of small blasts of plasma is pretty devastating. It does get hot though, so it's something to keep in the back of your mind. The Flamestorm Cannon, on the other hand, that one's pretty much always a winner. And if you go for Heavy Flamer Sponsons, you can also take a Heavy Flamer Pintle. You can throw out a lot of Heavy Flamer Daka. If you're Blood Angels, you can take Assault Cannon Sponsons, for instance. I think Salamanders also get boosted Heavy Flamers, so theirs would be pretty strong. But something you've also got to keep in mind with it is that if you move, well, you don't have the Heavy Tank special rule, so once you start moving any sort of distance with this thing, 6 inches for instance, you're only going to be firing 1 or 2 weapons at full ballistic skill. You can't snap fire flamers, so you won't be firing the others, and you're going to want to invest in Machine Spirit. Which brings me to a good point. Machine Spirit, Armored Ceramite, there's a lot of great options for Predators. You can take them in squadrons, upgrade squadron commanders, stuff like that. You're going to sink a lot of points into them fast. And that's probably something you don't want to do with Predator battle tanks. They take a lot of points to really pimp them out, but the thing is they're not worth that investment in my mind. They're probably a unit that's best played pretty stock. Put on the weapons you like, yes, but don't go around throwing Armored Ceramite and such on them. You're kind of throwing away your points. Maybe you could change this up if they're counting as a troops choice in like an Armored Breakthrough list, but again, not something I'd really want to throw my money at. I'd rather be saving up my points for bigger and better heavy support options. Brings me to the next point. Vindicators. Vindicators are good. They've always been good. They'll always be good. And the reason why is Strength 10 and AP2 is always good. There's pretty much no circumstance that that's bad in, because AP2 ignores all armor saves. And Strength 10's the highest strength in the game. Pretty simple. The faults... Vindicators have weak side and rear armor, but that's every Rhino Predator chassis. That's most tanks, except for basically Land Raiders. So it's not really that big a weakness. Short range. Short range is definitely probably the big thing. Vindicators are fire magnets. You don't get to see Vindicators flying around on full hull points at the end of the game. It's just not a thing. So, yeah. Another point with that, with Predators, Vindicators, Whirlwinds, any of the vehicles you're going to see tonight, wherever they're combining Games Workshop's plastic Rhino hulls with Forge World's resin upgrade, sides, roofs, that kind of thing, usually there's a lot of cleanup involved in it. They do not fit together well. I suggest a hairdryer to heat up the resin with. When it comes to something like the Vindicator front half of the hull here, behind the Demolisher cannon, there's this really thick bit of resin that forms the sort of pintle around it, or limited traverse mounting. That thing is really thick resin. I find that if I turn the oven on to about 50, put it in the oven for 15-20 minutes, that softens it up plenty, but you got to keep an eye on it that you don't warp the plastic badly or the resin badly, because it will damage it if you're not careful. So, experiment on some bits of sprue first perhaps, or some tank bits you don't care about if you're going to go down that route. Now, of course, when it comes to employing the Deimos Vindicator on the battlefield, drive forward, shoot it at enemy. You're probably going to lose the vehicle quickly, so try and pick out a very high value target and kill it quickly with your Vindicator. That's what it's good for. It's great for crushing squads of Terminators, especially elite Terminators, the kind that like to, hang out with Primarchs. Yeah, crush those. Custodes, this is probably one of their most mortal nemesis, because this instant kills Custodes. They don't get their normal armor save, they only get their invul save against it, and if they fail to save, it's instant death. So these punish Custodes, but you've got to get the hits, which is hard because they've got the Sodality and they can spread out 3 inches, which is totally fair. On top of this, Deimos Vindicator Laser Destroyer. Not very common, but I have 3 in my Thousand Suns army, and I found them to be fantastic. But the best way to make these fantastic is to take a command tank. So you upgrade one of your Vindicators to be the command tank, and that way when you shoot with 2 or more at the same target, you get to gain some of those cool command tank abilities like Tank Hunters and Monster Hunters. Now sure, you may look at it and go, it's just a laser destroyer, it's strength 9, AP 1, 36 inches range, 1-shot ordnance. That's not very good. Yeah, but stay still, and you get to fire it twice. And if you want, overcharge it. Roll a d6, don't roll a 1. And if you pass, again, don't roll that 1, you get to fire 3 shots. Now, 3 of these together, with Tank Hunters or Monster Hunters, is 9 shots that hit on 2s, that will roll 2d6, picking the highest for armor penetration, and combining that with Tank Hunters, or if you're shooting against monstrous creatures, you'll wound things like Castellax or Thanatar on 2s and 3s, and you'll get to re-roll it because of the Monster Hunters. So it's a really handy vehicle, and I'm absolutely shocked more people don't take them. They are expensive in points, but not crushingly expensive. It's a smart investment if you know how to play them. So moving on from there, we get to, of course, our Sikaran battle tank family. And, well, when you've got so many Sikarans to pick from, which one do you pick? Well, the base Sikaran battle tank is so balanced as an all-rounder. The fact that it ignores jinx saves, has that really good gun up top, it's pretty good. But the thing is, ever since the Punisher came along, it's sort of taken a bit of that niche away because it's firing so many shots. And the original Sikaran was sort of known as being the Daka machine with its 6 shots. Which would you pick? It really depends what you prefer. Me personally, I'm more inclined to pick the original, the GOAT. The fact that it's rending, it's strength 7, it can hurt flyers, twin linked, all these things mean more to me than just the sheer amount of shots that the Punisher can put out. When it comes to anti-tank, you then have these 3 bad boys, and well, for dedicated anti-tank, the Omega is crap. It's crap at everything, and yes, it can be made to work in certain situations, but I still think by far it's a waste of your money to buy one of these things. It's just not good enough, rules-wise, points-wise, even as a kit. I mean, it's a very nice kit to build when it comes to the turret. The hull itself can be a bit of a pain in the ass. The Sikaran hull is made up of 4 individual segments. The roof and cockpit is one segment. Then you have the little ribbed radiator type nose area, which includes these little fairings that extend up to the tips of the tracks. They're an individual component. Then there's a base plate that runs under the belly, and then there's a final section which is where the exhaust mount. Making those 4 parts the exact correct width in order to fit nicely onto the tracks on either side can be quite the nightmare. So if I'm going to go through the struggle of building that, and it can be a struggle. Some people, I know I've had one Sikaran tank I bought that it just went together like butter. It was beautiful. I've had other Sikaran battle tanks I bought where I actually had to go out to my workshop where I've got a big belt sander and belt sand the side of it for about 5 minutes on each side to get it to properly line up. And I know if I've built things correctly, I am a fitter by trade. So, yeah. Avoid this one. So then we get the Venator and the Arcus. The Venator is just a great tank killer. It's very good at shutting down tanks. The fact that if you do score a penetrating hit on an enemy tank, it can only fire snapshots the next turn is huge in a super heavy meta. Even if you're fighting other tanks like other Sikarans, Land Raiders, that kind of thing. Yeah, shut them down with it. It probably will penetrate them. It's a very powerful gun. But it is light on the amount of shots it can fire. So that's something to keep in mind. And it's not one of those ones that you're squadroning up. So then you get to the Arcus, and it's just clearly the superior Sikaran when it comes to all the different stats. But it's kind of a dick tank to play. I mean, I have one, I've played it. It's only in one of my lists for one of my armies. It is the biggest bullet magnet that's ever existed, and that's even in a game where Primarch may be present, this thing will still get shot at before the Primarch because it's ridiculous. Strength 8, AP 2, main guns, firing 8 shots, long range, yeah. Not a popular vehicle for that reason. Not necessarily fluffy. If you stick to the original couple, the Sikaran and the Venator, you'll cover everything that all the other variants do, including the Arcus. I mean, the Arcus is going to be the best of the tanks from a win-at-all-cost perspective, but it's not about winning at all costs, so perhaps avoid it in that regard. Moving on, we have the Legion Artillery. Now, the thing about Legion Artillery is it's sort of a 0 to 1 option. Now, when it comes to 0 to 1 options, what the hell do you pick? Well, the Legion Whirlwind is terrible. If you're going to take a Whirlwind, you're going to take it as a Whirlwind Scorpius, which is not a squadron and is not a 0 to 1 choice. But it will take up a valuable heavy support slot. Now, the fact that you get to fire, if you don't move, D3 plus 1, Strength 8 AP3 small blast with barrage is potent, yes. but it does come down to correct placement on the table, possibly running around with some Nuncio Voxes or such on the battlefield to help improve accuracy. These are things you got to keep in mind. So Scorpius, yes. Regular Legion Whirlwind, though. When you have vehicles that cost barely twice as much in points, and they have better armor, equal or slightly less range, or even in one case, such as the Basilisk, way more range, and they go from having a Strength 5 AP4 template, like the regular Whirlwind does, to Strength 9 AP3, or Strength 10 AP2, I think I know where my money's at. The Whirlwind is terrible, and the anti-aircraft Whirlwind is even worse somehow. So I can't really recommend either variants of the stock Whirlwind, that is the anti-air or the regular Whirlwind. Scorpius I can heartily recommend. The turret goes together pretty well as well, but it suffers from that same Rhino chassis problem of the side panels warp and the roof and prow warp on it. Kind of a dick to build. Legion Basilisk, very strong, works best on long-range tables. Since you won't face a huge amount of long-range tables, I do tend to lean more towards the Legion Medusa. Legion Medusa is better at those shorter range engagements, it does have the more powerful gun, but if you're playing those really big points games, apocalypse battles, then the Basilisk does tend to work better for those. What you pick is really entirely up to you. Unfortunately, can't say much more on it than that. As for how it fits together, you can see from this image that the side panel there actually doesn't mate up to the sides of the hull very well. There is quite a large gap there. Yeah, that's Forge World resin for you, and that is everything you need to know about it. You do have part of the Chimera hull, but it's mostly just Forge World resin that makes up the bulk of this model, and it's kind of a pain in the ass to put together. Maybe avoid it. For other reasons. Alright, Legion Aquator Bombard with Graviton Charge Cannon. Nope, it's craptacular. Avoid that one. Avoid it because it's expensive more than anything in dollars. If you think it's cool, again, buy what you think is cool, but the weapon itself is rather anemic. Then you get the Morbus Heavy Bombard, which is worse than a Whirlwind. It's got better range, but worse armor than a Vindicator. It's got worse range, but slightly better armor than a Medusa. I would go any of those vehicles over this thing. It's just not worth it. It looks cool though. I think it's the best looking of them. Then there's the Aquator Bombard with the Spicular Rocket System. This is a vehicle I have not built, so I can't speak to how well it goes together. The newer kits go together a bit better, I find, in general. The CAD design does allow that, I think. That is a slight improvement. The computer design, they can really tweak with the design to get things to fit together a bit better. The problem with this tank is really its rules. It's just a pain in the ass to play. I've only played it against one person, and they were proxying it because they thought of buying it. And obviously with all the lockdowns and such that they've hit, I just haven't had any real games since then. It's an alphabet soup of rules, and essentially it boils down to being a dick deliberately. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you fire this directly at a unit, it will do X amount of hits. But because it does X amount of hits, it's better for you to fire it because you pick a point on the ground between two units, hopefully getting both of them, or more. Perhaps there's 3 or 4 units in an area. And for every one of those units you touch, it automatically does X amount of hits to each one of those units. So it rewards you for playing cheesy. Somehow dropping one of these shells between units could do, say, 7 wounds on each of 3 units, or you drop it straight in the middle of a 20-man unit, lined up like British redcoats advancing in the Patriot, and it will only do 7 wounds to that one unit. It's like, hang on, how does it do less wounds when it hits more models? It's stupid tank. Meanwhile, it hits one model from another squad, all of a sudden that whole squad starts having chronic existence failure. I don't like its rules. they're convoluted, they're badly written, and they encourage bad behaviour from the players. If you like the tank and you want to play it, go for it by all means. But do know that I frown upon Forge World for how they implemented it. Then we get to some of the fun vehicles. The Spartan. Oh, the Spartan. The best tank in 30k? No. I will tell you what the best tank in 30k is. It is not the Spartan. Jeez. What's good about it? Okay, armor 14 all round. Beautiful. 5 hull points. Dominates. Quad las cannons. Excellent. The ability to turn those quad las cannons into twinkling laser destroyers. Not so excellent. Twinkling heavy bolter on top. The ability to mount a pintle weapon. Man, it's all good. Takes frag assault launchers, which is very handy if you're transporting Terminators and you deploy them through difficult terrain. It can also carry 25 models, which is usually a 10-man Terminator bodyguard, their Primarch, and a Primus Medicae to give her a run feel no pain. That's a thing. It's a very good vehicle. It was so good, in fact, it got some massive nerfs over the years for points. It's a very expensive vehicle to run, and people will run them, but the thing is, people have also learned how to kill them over the years. Usually haywire, chain fists. People aren't silly enough to try and get up close and multi-melter this thing to death, and they're not silly enough to try and shoot it from the front with las cannons, hopefully glance it to death. Neither of these things happens. Honestly, things like haywire, throwing Leviathan dreadnoughts its direction, that's the way most people kill them. Kraken penetrator flyers is another fun way to do it. So utility-wise, you will see them, yes, they're very popular, but they're not going to win games hands down. If you're running one of these with a really strong unit inside, chances are you've probably spent 1,000 points between it and the unit inside it, if not more, especially if it's got a Primarch, and you'll be looking at like 1,500 points. By the time you have a 10-man Terminator squad, the tank upgraded, and the Primarch. What does that mean? It means you're not going to see these in 1,000 point, 2,000 point games very often. If you do see one in a 2,000 point game, it's pretty much most of their army is going to be riding in this vehicle, in which case you can have your way with it and the rest of their army. As for putting it together, the tracks are a perennial nightmare because the tracks and the hull that they mount to expand and contract at different rates as the resin cures, which means everyone that's ever built one of these can attest to the fact that they are the absolute worst to build. The tracks never line up, people have to cut track links and all sorts of things, and as you may or may not see, the tracks are sort of these thin resin plates, and they overhang the wheels by quite a lot on each side. Now that's perfectly fine on, say, display models, that kind of thing, but what it actually means on the tabletop is when you transport these to and from tournaments, inevitably one of the tracks gets hit on the tip and the whole side of the track snaps off, and good luck gluing it back together to look the same. It doesn't. As for what it's like gluing the tracks together, as you follow along with me from going down the hull, so start up near the heavy bolter on the closest track and work your way down, you'll see that there's a link near the front, which is completely out of whack. Go under the hull, everything looks alright until you get just past the las cannon cabling, and then there's two links that sort of are smushed into one another because they've tried to make the tracks work, and they don't. And they've done the right thing, which is try and hide it underneath the vehicle, but you can see it. And if you're seeing this in the promotional image of the tank, just think what it's like to own, buy, and build one of these things. Pain in the ass. Absolute pain. And also assembling the hull suffers from the same problems as the Sicaran, which is you need to make all these many parts of the hull line up perfectly with each other before you can glue them to the side track sections. They have, of course, made some refinements to fix the tracks over the years, so if you're buying a new one from Forge World, you won't have those track issues, but if you buy a second-hand one, older one, you will probably have those issues. Now, the Melkador. The Melkador is one that used to be rather common in some lists. I played against an army at Active Heresy 2, I think it was. It had 4 or 5 of these. But in short, they were super heavy, now they're not, now they suck. Super heavy Melkadors were really strong. They were even... I think the reason they nerfed them from being super heavies to just heavies was the fact that when they blew up, the explosions were these horrible D-strength Titanic explosions and such, where you had the 3-ring explosion and different units caught within different radiuses of the tank as it exploded got hurt. And people could use these things to just basically suicide bomb them into the middle of other armies. Which is not really playing in the spirit of the game, but, well, you know, it is what it is. So they nerfed them by making them now just a heavy tank. Problem is they don't really have the hull points to fight as a heavy tank with the armor they've got and the war gear options available. So say battle cannon and 3 heavy bolters, for instance, not a great loadout, or in this case I think it's 2 auto cannons and a heavy bolter. Yeah, it's not great. Even with a flare shield on the front to help it out, it's still got pretty moderate to middling side and rear armor. Yeah, you can take a hull-mounted demolisher cannon, in which case, what are you going to fire? The battle cannon or the demolisher cannon? Good luck to you. Maybe the twin-linked las cannon on top. For the amount of points you're paying for the Melkador, it's just not worth it anymore. So I would avoid it, except for, you know, rule of cool, which when it comes to rule of cool, pretty much anything goes, right? Then we get to the Land Raider. The Land Raider is an interesting one. You have I believe this is the Phobos, which is, as you see, has an assault ramp on the front. You can assault straight out of it like a Spartan. Pretty nifty. Or you have the Proteus. Well, the Proteus is pretty good too. Although it can't take an assault ramp on the front, you can give it 3 twin-linked las cannons, and having played against Proteuses with 3 twin-linked las cannons, they're actually really, really good. My mate Eddie had one, and it was a really solid tank hunter, and you weren't paying that many points for it. What made it a solid tank hunter is the fact it's an armor 14 all-round vehicle with 3 twin-linked las cannons. It's really solid. And then you can give it a Pintle multi-melter or such, just in case you really, really want to be sure. And if you're Blood Angels, give it, say, a Pintle mounted assault cannon, so you can just hose down units that get too close. Which you take really depends. I am probably a bigger fan of the Proteus than the Phobos. The Phobos is just 240k for me. Not saying that you can't play it, sure you can. But I love the look of the old Octagon Proteuses more. They just feel more 30k to me. And they really take me back to my childhood and watching those original Land Raiders roll down tabletops. Of course, there is a third Land Raider variant. And that's the Land Raider Achilles. The Land Raider Achilles is no longer in production. There's the Achilles and the Achilles Alpha. This is the Alpha that you're looking at. The Achilles is the best tank in the Horus Heresy. Not just in the Mechanicum, the Solar Ogs, the Legiones Astartes, the Militia. It's just the best tank. And the reason why it's the best tank, it's immune to Lance. It's immune to Melter. It pretty much doesn't care that there's difficult or dangerous terrain. It's armor 14. It can transport 6 models. It has 2 twin-linked multi-melters, which are middling, and it's got that massive quad mortar built into the hull. And it's not ordnance. So, when I look at this tank, I think to myself, what's better? Oh, that's right, the Achilles Alpha, which is the version you want to run. So instead of taking a Land Raider squadron where you take, say, 2 Proteuses and this thing, take an Achilles Alpha. Yeah, it takes up 1 heavy support slot on its own. But the thing is, it can take 2 twin-linked Volkite Culverins on its sponsons, in addition to the quad mortar. If you take a Siege Breaker in your list, you can upgrade this thing with Phosphex weapons, which makes it themey, it makes it very strong, and it's a cool way of implementing artillery and support units like rapiers and thud guns into a tank army. And it's a really cool vehicle to put things like Tech Marines in, because one, they make it better, because they can heal hull points and such, but also it's a very thematic vehicle for someone like a Tech Marine to be in being transported by, because the Tech Marines famously used to man all the thud guns and quad mortars in old school 40k. It's also a cool vehicle to use if you need to transport, say, a command squad around. It has a 6 model transport capacity. It's a cool place to keep characters to keep them safe. Quickly move units around the battlefield and capture objectives. What am I saying? It's like a Sikaran Arcus, but with a transport capacity. It is all the firepower of heavy support in a transport tank. And it's tanky as hell. You're not paying for armoured ceramite and flare shields and stuff like that. You don't need it. Someone shoots a laser cannon at you, it's got to make it through all 14 of your armour. If someone turns around and tries to multi-melter you, you don't care. Someone shoots a lance weapon at you, you still don't care. It can be killed. There are plenty of weapons out there that'll do it, like graviton cannons and such. But the thing is, they may have paid a lot of points to get those graviton cannons to kill something like a Spartan. They're going to have just as hard a time killing this as a Spartan with graviton cannons. And unlike a Spartan, you're not getting close to them, because those graviton cannons at best are 36 inches range. Whilst you're sitting back at 48 inches range, firing shatter shells at people and laughing as your strength 8 AP3 salvos instant murder their marines, or crush their thalax, or slaughter their solar auxilia in their entrenchments. It's a fun tank. It's not broken. You can only take one in a heavy support slot, or one in a Land Raider squadron, if it's not the Alpha. You pay a fair amount of points for it, but not too many points for it, and I just love it. It's criminally underrated and probably my most loved tank, and I have one of these and a Sikaran Arcus and a Leviathan in my Iron Hands allied detachment. Now, before people cringe, that is not an army that is played with all those vehicles at once. The Iron Hands were a supplement I used for my White Scars that allowed me to take some of those heavy tanks thematically in my White Scars Sega Mazan lists. The idea being that, hey, the White Scars bought all the bikes and the fast assault stuff, and the Iron Hands would bring the cool toys like the Leviathan Dreadnought or the Sikaran Arcus or the Achilles Alpha. So, thematic. Whereas I've never played my Iron Hands just on their own with those 3 tanks, because I would probably get my head punched in for being a dick. And I don't really need my head punched in. It's been hit enough in my life. I don't need it to be hit more. So anyway, that's the overview of the tanks. The easiest tanks to put together in all of this, probably the original Predator battle tank, or perhaps the Whirlwind Scorpius. These tanks, yeah, the sides warp a little bit, the center hull can warp, but it's only 3 panels you've really got to straighten out to put together. The Sikaran, 4 individual segments that are all resin that have to perfectly fit together in order to mount to the side hulls. Yuck. Same thing with the Land Raider variants, it's pretty yuck. I suppose the argument for the Mark IIB Land Raider, this one is probably the easiest to put together. It's just a single resin component on top where the heavy bolter and I suppose driver's hatch is, and that's probably the worst warped part. On the sides, just the side sponsons, and they're pretty big solid blocks of resin. They usually aren't too deformed. On the back is a twin exhaust pipe instead of the quad exhaust pipe. That again is a pretty big resin component, so it doesn't warp too much. So I guess this is really the easiest one to put together, but practically, it's probably the Predators. Anyway, back with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching. I hope I have quickly explained these vehicles and what I like and don't like about them, and I hope you got something out of it. If you did, let me know in the comments below. If not, better luck to me next time. See you all then.